Hi YouTube, we'll see if I can keep this short. We are going to do more tech vids, don't worry about that, we're not giving up on tech. It's just the political spectrum's heating up a lot and the country's gone a little mad. So the reality is it's time to start crying ignorance over here too. And foul on all things. Recently the Supreme Court had 3 rulings. One on Prop 8, one on DOMA, and one on the Voters' Rights Act. The case on DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, is ambiguous and that thing sounds, was a woman married a woman lawfully, I believe it was in New York, and her spouse died, and her spouse left her, like spouses do, left her stuff. Well, the IRS said you have to pay a different tax bracket than married people and a different ratio of the inheritance you lose because you're not a man and your spouse was a woman, as defined under DOMA. So she challenged in the Supreme Court and said, with all due respect, I'm in a lawfully recognized marriage. Marriage doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution of the United States. The federal government doesn't have the right to define marriage. That's a right granted to the states because it isn't granted to the Fed, and my state has defined marriage as blah blah. Therefore, fuck off IRS. The court agreed. You're right. Now, exact same set of rules and exact same verdict, but everybody's angry about it. Prop 8. California amended their constitution to define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. People said, that's not right, I have the right to get married. They appealed to the Supreme Court. They said, federal government, tell California they can't amend their own constitution. With a heavy heart, the Supreme Court said, as much as we would like to, marriage isn't defined anywhere in the Constitution. And under the articles that define what we are allowed to do in the Constitution, we don't have the right here. We don't have authority to unilaterally be all-powerful. As much as we'd like to, for moral reasons in this case, we're not allowed to. So you've got to fix your own state's Constitution. We don't have the ability to do it for you. Californians, get on that. Prop 8 really does need to be overturned in the same way Prohibition was at the federal level, but it needs to be done at your Constitution. You don't want to live in a country where the federal government can tell the states to do whatever the hell it wants and bend them over and say, take it, state! You want the state to be able to say, fuck you, Fed, we're a state. You don't have all supreme power. Now on to the third one, Voter Rights Act. What this is being turned into is Whitey wants to stop black people from voting again, because that's just what needs to be. God, I hope it doesn't turn into that, although it does have the potential to. But nobody's really trying to pass count the jelly beans to determine if you can vote. How many jelly beans in the jar? It's like nobody's trying to do a Jim Crow law right now. They are trying to do some pretty strict voter registration laws, which I'm not inherently in favor of, but the core issue on this case was, do states have the right to regulate their own voting laws, and is it correct in the United States of America, assuming the Fed has the right to regulate states' ability to regulate their own voting laws, to do so discriminatorily? Because what has happened as that act has been renewed over the years is they've basically said one set of rules for states that were doing things that we didn't like in the 1960s and the 1960s, and states that weren't doing these things in the 1960s can do whatever the hell they want. Which may be why the white supremacist movement moved north, to get out of the states where they didn't have the right to be white supremacists. Just saying, it's like, I think it's a despicable thing. I wish we didn't have any of in this country, but you're not stopping it by punishing states that have largely cleaned up their act and exempting states that haven't. So the ruling of the Supreme Court was very much in line with that. It says, well, states have the right to make their own voting laws, but on some levels, because it is voting and it has an effect on national and federal government, the federal government has a say in this too, even though the states maintain largely sovereignty to regulate themselves. So any restrictions you put on states need to be enforced equally across all 50 states. The result of the moment is the states that were having to ask Papa Fed for permission to change their rules don't have to do it. And of course, new voter registration requirements and stricter things in some states were passed within hours of this ruling in some cases. But the Supreme Court left the door open, and basically what it had a problem with is it wasn't being enforced equally, not necessarily that it was being done. It says, no, Fed, you have to have one rule book for everybody, not for the not for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of somebody who did something years ago, and then another rule book for people who aren't descendants or living in areas where those people once lived. So, and I happen to agree with that ruling. Now, whether or not Congress will amend this thing and create a law that's equally enforced instead of discriminatory, well, that's up to the legislator. But the Supreme Court did make the correct decision in that federal government, when it comes to telling states what to do, even if you have the authority to do it, even if the Constitution has granted you that authority, you don't get to do so discriminatory. You have to do so equally. One set of rules for everybody. Come on, state, this is America. Come on, Fed, this is America. So those were the rulings. That was what happened. The core issue isn't all the things everybody's mad and arguing about. It's, do states have rights, and what are they, and what is the limitations on federal authority and reach? Focus on that key issue, because it's going to be really important in the coming years. There's a big push in the United States to push to amend away state sovereignty. There's people who think it's a good idea to have an all-powerful Fed, but I guarantee you an all-powerful federal government that can tell you whatever the hell it wants will use that power not just for good, but for evil. And you really want it to have to work to tell you what the hell you can do, rather than just unilaterally be able to decide. If your state tells you something bad, you need to fix your state. You don't want a world where you run to Papa Fed. Peace out all, food for thought.